Welcome to the Getting Started guide for Data2Model. Data2Model is a software as a service solution that allows the automatic generation of ArchiMate enterprise architecture models from various data sources. Data2Model falls under the umbrella of Models for Insight Enterprise Architecture 4.0 services for digital transformation. Its intent is to enable a repeatable, automated workflow for people who would normally create architecture models by hand. The basic workflow for Data2Model is as follows. Choose a dataset and upload it for parsing. Review the parsed dataset. Define model extraction rules. Extract the model from the data based on the rules defined. Review the model. If you like the generated model, commit it to the repository. If not, adjust the rules and try again. This video gives an introduction on how to use the Data2Model functionality. I will be taking you through the complete workflow step by step and explain how the application works along the way. When you first open Data2Model, you will be asked to log into your Models for Insight account. All Models for Insight services use a single sign-on. If you are already logged into another service, it is possible to skip the login step. If you have not yet registered for a Models for Insight account, you can do so by clicking the Register a New Account button on the login screen. If you need help, we have a separate video on the registration process. After logging in, you will be presented with the Data2Model application. You can verify that you are logged in as the right person by checking the username in the top right corner of the screen. By hovering over your username, you will bring up a menu where you can access your account settings, as well as log out of the app. The navigation bar also contains a link to the documentation and direct links to other Models for Insight services for easy access. Below the navigation bar are several tabs that will help guide you through each step of the Data2Model workflow. The first step is to upload the dataset from which you will derive your model. For the purpose of this demo, we will be using a sample dataset, which consists of API requests exchanged between systems running in a manufacturing facility. You can select the file containing your data from your device, either by dragging and dropping it onto the striped area, or by clicking the center button, which will open a dialog window. The following data formats are supported: XLS, XLSX, CSV, or a list of flat JSON objects. After selecting the file containing your data, hit the Submit File button at the bottom of the page. This will send your data to the Data2Model server for processing. The time this takes depends on the size of your dataset. After processing is completed, you will be moved on to the next workflow step. The next screen contains a table which shows the data as it was imported. This is the data that the model will be based on. Please make sure that the data as shown matches with your expectations. Once you are done, you can move to the next step by opening the Extractor Rules page. The Extractor Rules page shows 3 tables for rules defining elements, relationships, and views. The rules in these tables will be applied to your dataset to generate the model. By default, all the tables are empty. To add extractor rules, you have 2 options. You can either define the extractor rules yourself or load an existing set of rules. A rule button at the top of the page. This opens a side window in which you can define your rules. You can still navigate between the tabs in the main view while the window remains open. This can be useful when, for example, you need to refer to your dataset again. To define a new element, please select the Element tab at the top of the window. This is also selected by default. Give your new rule a name and write a short description of what the rule should do. In this case, we will define an element representing the source of the API request. Let's call the rule source. Next, you need to define the type of the element. This can be any ArchiMate element type. In this case, we will use an application component. Next, we need to select a column in our dataset by which we can recognize the concept. Every unique value in this column will represent an instance of this element. In this case, let's select the source column. This column contains the name of the applications which have sent an API request. Optionally, you can define a prefix for your IDs. This can be useful if you need to use the same column for multiple rules, essentially working as a namespace. Finally, you can define a name for your elements. This is the label that you will see in the views. We recommend to use a human readable value here. In this case, we will also use the source column for this. Optionally, you can assign attributes to your elements based on the columns in your dataset. We will come back to this later. Now that you have set up all parameters for the element, you can hit the Save button. Notice how the table with element rules is updated after you save the rule. It is possible to edit an existing rule by clicking the rule in the table. After making changes, you can update the current rule by clicking the Save button. Alternatively, you can create a new rule based on the current one by clicking the Save As button. Finally, you can delete an existing rule by holding the Delete button for 1 second. To define a relationship, you need at least 2 element rules. So let's just quickly define a rule for our target elements, representing the destination of the API request. Next, defining a relationship works in much the same way as defining an element. First, name the relationship and add a short description. This relationship will represent that there are API requests flowing between the source and the target application. Again, you will need to assign a type to the relationship. Any type of ArchiMate relationship is valid here. In this case, we will use a flow relationship. Next, define the ID of the relationship. Since each row in our dataset represents a transaction, let's select the ID column. For relationships, you need to specify the source and target elements. The source of the relationship will be the source rule that we have previously defined. This means that every relationship created will originate from elements created by the source rule. Likewise, the target of the relationship will be the target rule. This will create a relationship between source elements and target elements. Again, we recommend using a human readable name for this. In this case, we will use the message column. Finally, let's assign an attribute to our relationship. We would like to know the protocol that was used for the request. Therefore, we will add an attribute called protocol based on the method column. Now that you have some model components defined, let's define a view rule. Each of our views will contain the data flow between a particular source system and all target systems it is communicating with. Just like for elements and relationships, a view needs a name and a description. Furthermore, each view needs a distinct ID. Since this view will be based on the source applications, let's use the source column as the ID. You can name the views in two ways. You can define a static view name, or you can derive a dynamic view name from your data. In this case, we will use a dynamic view name based on the source application name. You can specify automatic layouts to arrange the elements on the view. The hierarchical layout arranges elements based on the relationships between them. Next, you can specify the path in the model organization tree in which you want to store the view. For this example, we will use a static subfolder called flow and the dynamic subfolder based on the name of the manufacturing site. Finally, we need to establish the contents of our view. For this, we will add the source and target elements we defined previously. Additionally, we can define relationships we wish to include. If we do not specify anything here, the extractor includes all known relationships between the elements in the view. You can limit this selection by including specific relationships instead. Now that we have defined some elements, relationships and views, we are ready to extract a model. Before doing so, we recommend saving the rules you have defined. Click the Save Rules dialog to open a dialog window. Here you can give your rule set a name. After defining a name for your rule set, hit the Save Rules button at the bottom of the dialog. This will download a file containing all the rules to your device. To load a previously saved rule set, click the Load Rules button. This will open a dialog window where you can select the file containing your rules. For this demo, we have a file with a few additional rules defined. Notice how, after loading the rules, the table with the rule definitions are updated. Loading previously defined rules is especially useful if, for example, you want to change the rules you previously used, or if your dataset has changed. With all the rules loaded, let's now extract the model from our dataset. To begin the extraction process, click the Extract Model button at the top of the page. This will submit your rules to the server. A progress bar will appear to indicate that the server is still processing. The processing time depends on the size of your dataset and the amount of rules you have defined. Once processing is completed, you'll be moved on to the next page. When the model has been generated, it will be visualized in the Model Explorer. This screen shows all the views in the model and has some filters to help you find any specific view you might be looking for. Use this screen to determine whether the model generated fits with your expectations, based on the data and the rules you have defined. On the right side of the page is the model view. Here, a single view from the model is visualized. You can select a different view via the drop-down menu above. You can zoom in and out of the view, as well as pan it in any direction. You can make the view area fit the screen by clicking the Toggle Full Screen button. This also returns the view to its original size if it is clicked again. To reset the view to its original position and zoom, click the Reset Zoom button. To the left of the page are two filters. You can search for any view name by typing it into the search field. You can also limit your search by selecting a specific path in the model organization where the view should be located. If you are satisfied with the generated model, you can commit it to the Models for Insight repository. To do so, click the Save Model button at the top of the page. This opens a dialog window. First, select the project to which you want to commit the model. Once you have selected the project, the branches for that project will be loaded. You can select either an existing branch or enter a new branch name to create a new branch for your model. Please select a conflict resolution template which should be applied in case there are conflicts with a previous version of the model. Finally, please provide a short description of the model. When you are done, click the Save button at the bottom of the page. A progress bar will appear while the commit is ongoing. If the generated model did not meet your expectation, you have the option to go back to the Rules tab and update your rules. This way, you can iteratively improve the rules to get the result you want. Let's now have a look at the generated model in the Models for Insight repository. You can see the model that we just committed from Data2Model in the list of models for my project. To retrieve the generated model, hover over the three dots and hit Retrieve Model. This will download a file to your device that you can open in Archie. After opening the model in Archie, you will see the same model you saw in the Data2Model application. Archie provides additional features to browse through the model, as well as editing capabilities. You can use Archie to make any changes to the model that are more easily done by hand than via the extractor. Once you are done making changes, you can upload the model back to the Models for Insight repository. We have additional videos about this process on our YouTube channel. This concludes the Getting Started guide for Data2Model. If you need support or have any questions, you can send us a message at info@aureliusenterprise.com or visit www.modelsforinsight.com. Please also visit our YouTube channel for additional Getting Started guides.